Welcome to the Apps on Cloud Summit. We are so glad that you've decided to join us, and we have a great session teed up for you today. Our guest is Matt Eastwood. Matt is a Senior Vice President at IDC, and he manages all of IDC's research around enterprise infrastructure, cloud, developers, and partnering. Now, his topic today is going to be Catalyzing Cloud, a path toward application and business transformation. So what I like about Matt, if I'm sure you've heard about him, you've probably watched some videos, it'll feel like he's just giving you advice, not analysis and not numbers, things that are going to help you act smarter when it comes to transformation and things that are going to help you move your business forward. I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to Matt, and I'll be back at the end of his talk so we can talk some Q&A. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you all for joining us today. So I'm going to take a look at digital transformation, the impact that this is having on cloud infrastructure, and really its foundational importance to your business. We'll do this by looking at how IT investments are being reprioritized, and we'll take a specific look at the importance of applications, cloud delivery, and the cloud ecosystem. So 10 months ago or a year ago, we all went into this sudden lockdown. The pandemic really forced all organizations to accelerate their digital transformation out of necessity with very little warning. And the headline of this pandemic has really been the role that technology has played. Many technology leaders have been praised for their efforts to maintain business continuity, and really we've seen some gaps exposed. So I think we're going to, as an industry, build off of what we've been through over the last year and really take an eye to the future. And I'd hope to kind of point to some of what we see here in the course of the next 25, 30 minutes. Organizations without a proper investment in cloud failed to be productive in a world that was really defined by remote work and remote learning. And this really served as a wake-up call to the importance of digital technologies in order to operate as a truly digital business. And I think it's important also to just put a little context on this and note that this is different from what we saw in the Great Recession 12 years ago. To open the conversation, we'll just talk a little bit about the market. So we saw some very interesting things when you look at what happened this last year or so versus what we saw 12 years ago. During the Great Recession, we saw IT actually decline more than what we saw in terms of GDP decline in the overall economy. And this time it was different. This time we actually saw IT spend hold up because of the importance that these digital technologies have on maintaining resiliency in the business's ability to continue to adapt and execute to all the change that we've seen over this past year. I'm just going to build this out and point a little bit to a couple of just high-level data points I think that are important to talk about when we think about the marketplace. We've identified 5 different areas that are driving an acceleration in the transformational journey that you all face as customers of technology. These areas are really beginning to shape and provide a foundational backdrop for what's happening in our industry. So we see trust. We see customers really rethinking security as a foundational element of the digital strategy. Security remains far too complicated, and the pandemic has introduced new threats to the landscape. And what we're also finding is that the tools in the hands of novice users are really not really the correct answer here. It's a bit of a recipe for disaster. And as a result, we see an opportunity for customers to get less focused on the integration of these tools and more focused on changing user behavior. So we're going to see a bundling of security technologies that will be delivered in a different, more consumable way. Around cloud, we see cloud investments remaining very, very strong all through this pandemic. It's really the fastest way to stand up new services in a transforming market. We also see impacts up and down the technology stack, including in everything from the enabling technologies in these clouds all the way up to the application layer. When we think about software, we see a shift towards more business differentiation through software. and more customers beginning to think about building their own ecosystems around applications. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. These applications are actually seeing more and more complexities, more interdependencies with one another. And we're expecting that we'll see a doubling of the number of applications installed over the next 4 years. And this is influencing placement of applications, including at the edge. When we think about this, 60% of all data is created at endpoints, and applications will follow the data to the point of creation, and the infrastructure really needs to be in place to support those applications where they will live. They're going to be closer to the service. The intended intention here is really to drive better, more effective decision making closer to where that data is created in almost real time. And this is creating a lot of jockeying in our industry between the infrastructure providers themselves. We see a lot of telco activity in the edge space, and even the operational technology providers, the folks that are really industry specific in manufacturing and healthcare, et cetera, really playing a role in how these edges are shaping up. And then finally, with work, it's evolving faster than ever. We're heading into a world that's going to be much more hybrid in nature. People want to connect. They're going to want to seek places where they can aggregate and actually work together again. But they also recognize that the way that they work will probably never return to the way that it was. So we're going to live in a world that takes the best of what we knew, combines it with what we've learned over this last year plus, and work will be done in different ways going forward. So it all does start with data when we think about transformation and we think about digital businesses. It's really about turning this data into insights. It's about really a massive amount of data. So we see a growth of roughly 26% per year in the amount of data that we have in our ecosystem. 89% of this is duplicated data, creates a lot of liabilities for organizations. But really the point here is that more and more of this data is being created at those endpoints, as I said, at edge locations. And this is beginning to pull the applications to the edge and really stretch our infrastructures as we look to make more effective use of this data where it's being created. Workloads. The workloads and the investments in these workloads are really shifting in ways that are creating new points of really criticality in these decisions. We see a significant increase in application dependencies that I've mentioned. This is occurring in a way that impacts workload placement and also how we think about how critical these applications are to the business. The focus is on clearly shifting towards data and analytics in an attempt to shorten the time to market around these decisions that we're making. These workloads tend to be very high value applications, which drive the needs for very intelligent resource allocation to these applications. So it's really intended to ensure the reliability, availability, and the security around these applications using much more intelligent frameworks and much more intelligent tool sets and platforms to help us get there. We see operational processes changing as well. IT is being redefined as we shift to cloud native operations, new unified governance models, and an aggressive focus on building new data management competencies. We think that this is going to really land along 3 dimensions. One is really around location, where enterprises are rethinking IT resource placement, including at the edge. It's going to be focusing on consumption, where organizations are leveraging a range of consumption models for their infrastructure, and it will be increasingly aligned with key business metrics as we move to more of kind of an OpEx model from a CapEx model. And then asset sharing. We'll see shared infrastructure usage returning after the past 5 years. The focus is really increasingly on moving towards a cloud-like model. We're expecting these application dependencies to rise, as I've said. And as we do this, we think that by 2024, about 80% of enterprises will focus on overhauling their infrastructure costs and reducing their operational complexity. And they'll look for technologies that help them get there. Cloud is the foundation for the future. When I think of this, I think of cloud as an operating model for IT, not as a destination so much. But this is about the technology, it's about the deployment and the operations, and they're really all key underpinnings for a robust digital infrastructure. We see a complementary digital infrastructure ecosystem emerging that's cloud-centric and leverages technologies like software-defined everything, memory-driven infrastructures, and cloud-based orchestration. Deployment will become ubiquitous, and this in turn will drive a shift in consumption model and location, as I said. Operations will shift to a cloud-based provisioning, optimization, control, and cross-cloud data management will become more and more important to organizations, as well as new skills and roles that will develop around all of this as we focus more and more of our energy higher up the stack as we try to differentiate using all this application and data intelligence that we have. Digital transformation is really going to drive a scale, and with scale becomes the potential for management overhead across people, technology, and people. And we believe that these stretched cloud resources and data sets are going to pose the single biggest challenge for IT going forward. The workloads are changing. Digital experience drives differentiation via these apps and data, as we've been saying, and this in turn is driving significant infrastructure considerations, including the drive towards more modular design and more heterogeneity. We believe that cloud native frameworks and edge service provider deployments will become the norm. We'll also see hybrid cloud drive cross environment data management tools that span both traditional CapEx as well as these emerging OpEx delivery models. And in doing this, the race to differentiate, IDC predicts that 25% of Fortune 500 organizations will become software developers by 2025. As they do this, we're going to see more and more reuse of third-party code, and this is going to result in more and more applications. And taken together, we believe that we'll roughly see applications double in the next 4 years. And this is going to drive us towards the need for more abstraction with microservices and orchestration that's clearly automated in order to really keep up with this application load. We're not going to grow the people anywhere near as fast as data and applications are growing. The edge becomes more important in this. Our research suggests that almost 3/4 of all users view edge as a strategic area of investment for them. IDC's edge research suggests that 95% of edge platforms will be built using cloud native platforms. These edge cloud services are moving closer and closer to the customer, and this is putting apps and data to use more efficiently. That's really the goal here. These edge cloud services will be hosted in locations which include things like remote branch office, telco, network and edge clouds, and also industry-specific sites. And we fully expect when this happens, we're going to see more and more convergence occurring across these IT landscapes, these OT landscapes, as well as the communication technology landscapes as well. Really would recommend you keep an eye on this space. There's a lot happening here. New partnerships are forming both on go-to-market side as well as on the technology side. So we talk a lot about what this means for operations and the need to be more autonomous in how we think about this. We're rapidly moving from human scale to cloud scale. We see customers moving from multi-cloud silos to self-service cloud centers of excellence. This is driving a shift towards intelligent cloud ops, which includes both the automation of tasks as well as workflow automation. And as we do this, it's driving a bit of a focus, as I said, on this convergence around IT ops, cloud ops, and DevOps. It's also focusing more and more into this observability space, with AI focused on meeting the needs created through IT reskilling, new processes, different approaches to decision making. This is all centered on workflow. Observability will integrate logs and AI and ML in order to coordinate events, to automate those events, and also orchestrate these activities. So as we do this, we think that the only way an enterprise can really scale appropriately is, in fact, we think 75% will actually believe that their IT headcount will grow at a rate that's below the rate of application growth. And again, scaling will require a very different thinking around automation. There'll be much more automation required to get there. I also like to highlight what this means to ecosystems. So when we think about our industry, we think about ecosystems touching on the technology side as well as the go-to-market side, how these solutions come together. Suppliers and their partners need to determine where they can best add value in a market that's increasingly being defined by a portfolio of digital services. They must be able to accelerate their customers' move towards these autonomous operations that we've been talking about in this digital infrastructure. Digital transformation and cloud delivery are really redefining the role of the IT solutions delivery ecosystem. So in the old world, it really focused on how customers made an upfront investment and the partner really combined time with technology to deliver a value-added output, a system that was really built and customized for the user. In the new world, it's focusing on the outcome. It's really focusing on bringing ideas and innovation to the center of this, and the output really being a managed service or a SaaS application that's really aligned with your business goals. So increasingly, you'll consume in this way. This is redefining a number of different dimensions in the partnering model. Ultimately, this is about really how we can get on and meet new social, environmental responsibility and ethical buyer requirements, as an example. This will include things like supply chain certification and objectives around carbon neutrality and sustainability. It's really thinking very differently about what's important to you as a consumer of IT and how you want that IT delivered in a way that really fits and aligns with the business objectives that you have. So you're taking less risk. The supplier of your technology is taking on more of that risk and presenting it to you in a way that fits better with the business model that you have. So cloud adoption has reached critical mass. For years, we have studied and pointed to workloads as the critical area for suppliers to really understand. The most important consideration here is that all workloads are not created equal. We live in this hybrid world, which will increasingly favor a mix of both public and private clouds. And these private clouds will increasingly live in a hosted world, in a service provider environment. The slide here shows really where we are with cloud adoption overall. More than half of all organizations that we speak with have never run a production workload in a public cloud. I know that seems amazing to a lot of you, but when you think about the maturity of IT and how long it actually gets all the way through to deployment in some of these new emerging models, it takes some time. But when we do look at this, the most mature cloud users are actually running more applications in private cloud. So we start to see some very interesting dynamics as people begin to use more cloud, particularly as they think about engagement and their engagement models. And then they also start to think more about what these applications look like as they bring more data intelligence into the applications, and those interdependencies start to influence where they're going to land the application and how they want to manage and host it. One aspect of the cloud journey that's not often told or is misunderstood is really the rate of churn that we see in the market. What this means is we see workloads moving in and out of these environments all the time. So it's not a one-way journey. We actually see the interoperability requirements of modern applications determining the most appropriate landing zone. But in this way, it's really essential to think about these applications kind of as a new way of thinking about something like the concept of data gravity, with the edge and cloud native applications playing a really significant role in determining a lot of the decision making around IT going forward. To put a little bit more of a finer point on this, when we ask customers, we clearly see a trend away from traditional IT and towards cloud-based IT, that operating model that I described. But more and more IT will live in service provider data centers, make no mistake about that. But the churn is really across all of this. We see applications moving in and out of private cloud, public cloud, whether it's hosted or on-prem, as well as in and out of SaaS environments as well. And that leads us to a conversation around more optimization, the need for more monitoring and security tools that help clouds really achieve some of the objectives that these enterprises have around cloud. IT suppliers need to understand that enterprises are looking for help when it comes to things like performance monitoring, cost management, automation, and also capacity optimization in particular as it relates to all of these workloads. So hybrid is really where it's at. We've seen it double in the last 12 months due to advances in management tools and also governance capabilities. The more that IT lives in service provider data centers, the more that we're going to see interoperability requirements for modern applications increasing and influencing this. In a way, it's really driving, just a very different view of how IT decision making those decisions are made, because we're thinking more about the application and where it needs to fit and the strategic interdependencies that they have. Of course, this redistributes our IT. We see more and more moving into these cloud environments, as I've been describing, and more of this moving into these service provider owned data centers. It doesn't mean that you don't care about the operations of your IT, you do. What it means is that you're getting out of the real estate business and you're putting more differentiated attention on the apps and the data itself, and you're looking for more help from the marketplace in how you deliver and support the resources that those applications need in order to really maintain the service levels that you require and the security levels that you require. So cloud services are expanding closer to the customer all the time. And as this happens, this really represents a mix of both public shared and private dedicated options. There is, as I've mentioned, a real battle for influence here. Really, a lot of this is being driven by this notion of the edge and what the edge is and how those edges become a bit more vertically specific. The edge to a hospital or a healthcare administrator is quite different from a manufacturer or a retailer. So a lot of this becomes very vertically specific when you start to think about the business model and the applications themselves, but the infrastructure itself is increasingly going to be managed in a way that's highly automated, lights out, and you'll be looking for tooling that really helps you get there and create this dynamic infrastructure that can scale with the business, but do it in a way that's highly optimized. Okay, so we're just about to wrap up here, and as we do this, we've got a long way to go still with cloud. The focus has clearly moved away from lift and shift and rehost and towards a more of a cloud-first approach that starts with the application. The architectural implications for this are real. It leads towards a lot more use of componentized applications that have greater interdependencies with different data sets and other applications. And since IDC expects that we'll continue to see an explosion in the number of applications, we believe that, as I've been saying, automation will play a significant role in how you deliver all this to your organizations. And to just kind of bring this all to a close, I wanted to showcase 4 predictions that really highlight what we believe will happen across these workloads, across the edge, the automation that's required, as well as the ecosystems that we've been talking about here. When we think about this brave new world, applications represent the critical differentiator for businesses of all types. Applications will need more intelligence embedded in them. And we believe that by 2024, over half of all enterprises will rely on embedded AI functions in their business critical applications in order to make real-time business decisions and directly drive business outcomes. When we think about edge and some of the network requirements, we think that these new workloads will follow the data to the edge, and this will have an impact on delivery. By 2024, about a quarter of all organizations will improve business agility by integrating edge data with applications built on cloud platforms and enabled by this ecosystem of partners that I've been talking about. With automation, of course, with scale that's stretching to the edge, we'll need massive amounts of automation. By 2022, 3/4 of enterprises will deploy a unified management system for their clouds, their networks, and their data centers. And this will be done as much as anything as a hedge against business resiliency threats that could result from an expanding infrastructure and its growing operational complexity. And then finally, when we think about ecosystems, this transformation that's happening in our industry at the business level is accelerating more and more customers to become IT suppliers. So by 2024, we expect that about half of the global 2000 will actually leverage their own industry-specific knowledge to sell internally developed industry-specific applications and data services as a subscription. So you're going to see ecosystems developing in different sectors. You see this with companies like Home Depot and Walgreens and CVS already today doing this with how they partner across their business with different suppliers, with their own data and with their own applications. Okay, so to close this out, new digital experiences are redefining business disruption. And accordingly, apps and data have become strategic differentiators for everyone. The edge is going to stretch and stress these infrastructures in new ways. We'll see unprecedented amounts of scale, and shifts in computing, storage, and networking loads will really accelerate the need for more automation. IT is worthy of innovation. When I talk to respondents and folks like yourselves, about 70% of you are having regular discussions with your board of directors about the importance of IT and an IT strategy to achieving all of this. So the overall strategic value of IT is continuing to rise as a result, and it's really important that the business leaders are looped into and kept close to what some of your objectives are, so you can keep yourself in alignment. You can't really wait around for them to determine where they want to go. You have to be ready for them. We view this as what I would describe as frictionless connectivity, frictionless deployment, and frictionless operations. That's ultimately how I would like to describe where I think we're headed here. So I'm going to end there, and I'll ask Bobby to come back on screen, and we can have a little bit of discussion, go back and forth with a few questions to just kind of draw out some of this a little bit more clearly for all of you.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate not just the amount of ground that you covered, but also the pace. It felt like you hit a bunch of different topics, but it was kind of delivered in such a way that we could absorb it. So thank you for doing that. Couple questions. So there's a lot of things that there are a lot of things that you talked about. And one of the things that I would wrestle with if I were sitting in the CIO seat, if you could give us some coaching, with all of the possibilities and options, how would you balance operations versus innovation? When you think about your resources, your people, your budget, what's the right mix that the ideal CIO should have in mind as they attack a lot of the landscape you just laid out for us?
Oh, I like that question, Bobby. So typically, and I'm going to push people a little bit on this one, in most, it's easy to say something like 80-20. I would say in most organizations, 70 to 80% of the energy goes into maintaining what you have,
Mhm.
and 20 to 30% goes into more innovation around kind of where you need to go.
Mhm.
I do think going forward, we're going to need to think more about moving a bit more of the resource into that innovation side.
Right.
So maybe it goes to 60-40, and that would probably be a goal for a
Okay.
lot of organizations. And for them to get there, what it really means is they're going to need to focus their resources, their cash, and their people on where they can truly differentiate in the market, and then let go of things that are a little bit more rudimentary, a little bit more table stakes that they could acquire in the market and not try to differentiate around. And so we saw some very obvious things happen here where, very few of us are hosting our own email anymore.
Right.
So when you get into things like content and collaboration, those have become things that we've outsourced and given away. But what we do see, and you saw me mention earlier, is a lot of the applications that folks are looking to differentiate around involve data, they involve AI, rich
Mhm.
analytics, and that's not only on the downstream analytics side, it's also in the applications themselves. So a lot of these business apps are going to have a lot more embedded intelligence. So I think hopefully that answers the question, but we're going to try to see a world that maybe was 80-20, or maybe in a good state 70-30, moving to something that's more like 60-40.
Okay, that's good because I've heard people say things like, 80% of your budget should be innovation, 20% operations, and that just doesn't quite seem realistic, honestly, with the level of complexity we're dealing with today, as again, as you
Yeah.
laid it out very well.
Yeah, I mean, even if you think about how we've been working for the last year, a lot of that is table stakes
Right.
type stuff,
Right.
and yeah, so I think you don't want to push too high, or you'll fail, because you do need to support a lot of this really basic stuff to keep the business operating and moving forward.
Right. I use the real estate analogy a lot, Matt, to kind of think about operations versus innovation, right? Operations is the windows, the roof, and innovation is the granite countertops and the new TV. And if your ratios are out of whack, you'll be watching an 8K television with a hole in the roof and it's raining on your head. I don't think any of us want to see that.
I love that. That's a great way to think about it.
Thank you. little bit different question, and please be creative with this one, Matt. So we want to play the stock picking game when it comes to technology. I'd love to kind of get your take on if you were thinking about technologies, AI, ML, PaaS, microservices, containers. We know all that jargon. Which ones would be on your buy list, and which ones would be on your watch list that may not quite be ready for prime time yet?
So I think it's interesting. So if you think about this from the perspective of the amount of washing that we do as an industry around some of these hot terms,
Mhm.
we've been, AI is not new, but certainly the capabilities that we have in the technologies that we have at the core allow us to do things that we couldn't do economically before.
Mhm.
I do think, here we are 10 years into cloud, and we're still having conversations around, where we are with cloud and how we think this will play out. I think we have a pretty good sense for the
Mhm.
nature of cloud being hybrid and more of the consumption moving into an as a service model, whether that's traditional infrastructure or something that is truly, kind of a cloud native implementation. So when I think about the question, I do think that we've seen probably an over rotation around AI. And I'm
Right.
going to say it this way. I think that for most AI and the way that most AI will be consumed, it will actually be consumed in the services that we actually consume. So a
Right.
lot of the IT services that are put forward that we can consume will have AI at their core. That's really a way of making these environments easier to manage and to actually manage in a way that we can keep up with the realities of where we're going to go with these applications and
Right.
data portfolios. So I think AI as something that a lot of folks spend a lot of time differentiating in themselves,
Mhm.
not as much today. I think more of the AI that's consumed today will be in the services that we're actually using and acquiring, through more of a consumption model.
Mhm.
So I think I'm a big believer in AI, but I think the way that we'll consume it will be something that's abstracted from most users. If you think about it, there are very few companies on the planet that have the amount of resource that a company like a Microsoft or a Google have to really be investing to be at the forefront of AI technology. So I think a lot of it is going to be embedded in the core technology. So I guess I would say I would look at AI in that respect. Meaning, in fact, when you talk to a lot of the IT leaders that we do, they actually see AI and analytics as a way of actually achieving the optimization they need to, because they're not going to be able to get there any other way. And then you will eventually see it work its way up into some of the line of business functions, but it,
Mhm.
it will get there kind of last. And I think what you'll see is organizations or jobs that require a lot of creativity
Mhm.
and a lot of emotional intelligence, they're going to be among the last things to really be chomped off with AI. AI is going to focus on things that are very repeatable and really shouldn't be in the hands of humans. So humans can be freed up to do some of those higher value tasks.
Right. So AI seems like something that would that be buy list or watch list for you then? I
I
guess.
think I think on the IT side, it's buy list. I think
Okay.
more broadly in business and in life, I would say it's on watch list. And then the other one that I'd probably put on my buy list would be security, but security from the perspective of again, how can we more easily protect the world that we live in, and that's very distributed. So it's not going to be a world around security that's really kind of building this containment layer that we've always done. It's going to be more about how do we embed security in the data and in the applications that are free flowing around our networks.
Mhm.
So it's a different security model, and I'm not sure there's any one company that'll ever be able to solve that. It's going to be,
Agreed.
again, security is kind of like trying to push on a cloud. It's always moving around, and it's hard to really define who's doing this or that. But I would say security is another big one that's going to continue to get more mind share and more of our wallet.
Agreed. Agreed. I love that, Matt. I think last question. I think we're kind of coming to the end of our time for the segment, but um, lots of options, lots of choices. We can go back and forth on acronyms all day. IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, CaaS. I've actually mentioned to some people, Matt, I think we're wrestling with CaaS, but not containers as a service, confusion as a service, because we're overwhelmed with all the things that are out there. Give us some coaching, Matt. How do people decide in a land of so many different things to choose from? How do they decide what the best fit is for their business and their applications?
So I actually would go back, Bobby, to where we started this Q&A, and that's really the you asked about where folks are going to innovate. I actually think the real answer to the question you just asked is you have to meet the customer where they are. And the reality is most customers have very complex infrastructures and sets of applications and data. And so I think that becomes the starting point for this journey. You used the analogy earlier around kind of the house and the structure versus what's inside. I think it's similar here, where for the user, they need to think about this in a way that kind of like we invest in tax planning, retirement planning. You need to continually check in and think about the portfolio of assets you have in your technology stable, whether those are applications, data sets, or infrastructure, and then plan where you're going and continually evolving your thinking when you start to think about what that roadmap looks like to as a service. What I would say is most organizations are still kind of landing where they want to kind of own their base and they want to kind of rent their peak. And what's challenging there is as the infrastructure stretch and we move more to the edge, they're having less of a grasp on truly what that peak looks like and truly what they maybe want to own versus rent. So I think you see more of a rotation towards as a service because there's uncertainty there. But the reality is, whether it's 60-40 or whatever split you want to put on it, there's still going to be a fair amount of technology that we want to own because they're well understood and it's economical to do it that way. And there are those that we're going to want to invest in relationships with partners and suppliers to help offload some of that risk. Kind of like you mentioned the house. I mean, I use a car analogy. Do you want to buy the car? Do you want to lease the car? Do you want to use Uber or Lyft? It all depends on what the job is to be done. If you're going to drive 20 or 30,000 miles a year, you're going to want to own that car. That's the cheapest way to do it. If you're just taking 1 or 2 trips a month, you're going to want to use Uber or Lyft. And I think a lot of this fits into that.
That's excellent, Matt. I'll pose one more question if you allow me.
Sure.
As we're talking about, I love that own the base, rent the peak. I might have to borrow that if that's okay. But we can't leave this conversation. Obviously, applications cost money. They run on resources, whether it's in the data center or in the cloud. How do you help people differentiate the difference between spend and waste? As there are big bills in the data center or in the cloud. How do you differentiate, especially in the cloud spend versus cloud waste?
I think so. Where my mind goes here, 100% is really you have to be able to measure this. So if you can't measure it, if you don't know what you're actually spending, you just don't know how much is potentially wasted. And I think that's true for anything in IT. If you don't have a good way of kind of putting some kind of a measurement around it and understanding what it's truly costing you, there probably is waste there. So we know that organizations struggle that have rotated to the public cloud too fully because they're inefficiently using that. And we know there are plenty of cases with a more traditional on-prem model where folks are, have things that probably shouldn't live there. So I guess it all comes down to, again, a good overall kind of read on what you have, doing a nice inventory, and then putting some kind of an economic wrapper around that. You'll probably be surprised in what you find. It gets back to the point I was making about retirement planning and tax planning. And it's painful, but none of us like to do it, but you really need to do it in order to kind of if you're trying to make a shift in how you spend, you need to understand what your baseline is before you can get there.
I couldn't have said that any better, Matt. It really aligns with our philosophy of Turbonomic. You have to measure what the applications actually need so that you can give them the resources that they need at different times.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us. If people want to subscribe to more of your work and kind of understand more of your thoughts on these topics, how can they track with you?
Well, probably the easiest way to find me is on either Twitter or LinkedIn, but at Matt Eastwood is my Twitter handle, and you can find me on LinkedIn easily at Matt Eastwood at IDC.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Apps on Cloud Summit. For those who are listening, I hope you tune in for the rest of the conference. Hopefully more insight, just like what Matt gave us today, but we're glad you're here and we hope you stay with us. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. Stay with us for the rest of the conference.